Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for being here and for this exciting panel to join us. Fostering organizational change is really, really important, and it's particularly important in terms of these societal challenges that we're facing. Changes in regulations, for example, that are happening, in terms of net zero. We've seen, in California in 2035, there won't be any more electric cars that will be allowed to be sold. So what do you do if you're a company selling cars? How do you change the culture of the company in terms of, kind of fundamentally, addressing these challenges? So we have a fantastic panel here, and maybe we'll start with the introductions. And I will start with Natalie. So Natalie, thanks for joining us. So maybe you can just start introducing, kind of how and why you started, your company, and what was the impetus for that and what you do.
Hi, I'm Natalie Byrne. I'm the founder of Blank Space. Blank Space works with brands, foundations, leaders on their impact strategy and how we're really creating a movement around that work. I call it the do and the say. So looking at building strategy, whether it's around gender or diversity or climate, that really is tied to the brand or the leader, and then helping to build a platform where we can actually do work and take action. Sometimes that comes together as building coalitions and leveraging them all the way up to work with the UN. And sometimes that's actually public-private partnerships here in our own city and looking at how we can move the needle around where we are. So I'm very excited to be here. I'm very passionate about this work.
Thank you. Tim, so thank you very much also for stepping in at the last minute and joining us. Hamed wasn't, had an emergency, and we're really very appreciative for you to join us. So please tell us, kind of your work on ESG at Deloitte, what you do, and why are you excited about this?
Absolutely, and it's really a pleasure to be here. I have a long-standing affinity with UCLA and with the school here. I spent a lot of time at the law school, and my kids actually go to summer camp here, and so I'll be here back in a couple weeks. For me, ESG it's obviously broader than just environment. It's really about sort of changing the way that companies both interact with the planet and the way that they affect change in the planet. And so at Deloitte, as a part of our strategy practice, I work with clients across the landscape, primarily in decarbonization, and helping them figure out how to navigate the landscape of regulatory, legal, and consumer preference changes that are happening, and to help them thrive in the future environment. I came to Deloitte about a year ago from working in the nonprofit sector from the Environmental Defense Fund for about 15 years. And then before that, doing refinery and chemical plant inspections for governments as an enforcement officer in the San Francisco Bay Area. So kind of running the government, nonprofit, and now private sector, and seeing all the different landscapes that exist within each and solving problems in each.
Okay, well, thank you. Sunny, so you're working for LA 2028. And so in the sustainability area. So can you tell us more about what you're planning to have a sustainable LA 2028?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Sunny Sohrabian. I'm the Director of Sustainability at LA 28. We are the organizing committee that is bringing the 2028 Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games here in Los Angeles. I've been with the organization for almost 2 years now, and in my role, Tim, you're talking about ESG in general, but in my specific role, I'm really looking at that E, so the environmental sustainability component. And the way I describe my job is there is the operational component of what we're doing, and so it's really looking at putting that strategy together, the foundation together, understanding what our targets and commitments are going to be and how we're going to achieve that. But then outside of the operational component, it's also the community and social component. So how are we working with our community to bring them along into our plans? And so anything that we are creating, we're not doing in isolation, and we're creating a games that is going to belong to all of Los Angeles. So we have about 5 years,
right.
Which seems like a long time, but it's going to happen very quickly. But it's exciting to be here and to speak with you all today. Our offices are right across the street, and so anytime we can hop over and be here at UCLA, that's exciting, especially because UCLA will be hosting the Athlete Village. So this campus will be hosting 1,500 athletes in the span of 4 weeks.
Okay, well, yes, 5 years will fly by. Looking forward to that. So I'm particularly excited about this panel because at the Center for Impact at Anderson, our mission is actually to educate the next generation of transformative leaders, addressing societal impacts. And so I have questions about you in terms of, kind of providing us, to start with, specific examples, kind of a time where you had to challenge the status quo within an organization, and how did you go about it? Maybe you want to go in order, Natalie, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think when I start the work with a brand, we really start with the DNA of the organization. My biggest challenge would be with organizations that kind of work backwards and are just seeing something that's happening that month because it's a cultural awareness moment, and then kind of tagging on what looks like a very, off marketing campaign, right? We can kind of see those happening everywhere. People are talking about it as woke washing, greenwashing, things where companies are trying to do something, but they're actually not doing the work ahead. So really the challenge for me becomes an opportunity, because we get to work with these brands and say, who are you? What are your values? Why do you exist in the marketplace? Tell us about why you founded this company. Tell us about your target audiences, who you're reaching, who your consumer is, who your audience is. And from there we get to actually build a really authentic story that is tied to their values, a really authentic baseline for why they're doing this work. And then in some cases, Timothy's role in looking at ESG and actually looking at the governance of these things and how all of the different parts of the company are laddering up to this work, so that when you start to go out in the world, it really makes sense. It's not something that's a one-off, it's part of your every single day, and it actually can just help you as a business and your value proposition and to drive sales.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that for us, a lot of times people will come with a question. And you can look at the Inflation Reduction Act. That was a really large measure that was passed by the federal government last year, but the largest single investment in clean energy and climate reduction, in the nation's and maybe even the world's history. And we have a lot of companies coming to us saying, either it's their tax folks or their environmental folks saying, hey, there's probably some money out there, help us figure out how to go access it, right? And so the status quo is money on the table, let's go figure out how to go get it. Deloitte, come and help us. But when we start to look at it, we look at the IRA as changing the landscape, changing the game, of supply chains, of domestic production, of consumer preferences, really of where companies need to be in order to survive and thrive in this world. Because when you think about it, as the landscape for ESG changes, standing still is really falling behind. It's like the companies around you are moving, consumer preferences are changing, your own employees are changing what kind of companies they want to work for, and seeing in the landscape how they can really create, opportunities for themselves and other companies that maybe are more aligned with their interests. And so by talking about, number one, companies that invest and are attuned to ESG principles and sustainability, they have generally higher returns. I mean, the data is pretty clear. You can have a 5 to 7% greater revenue and profit margin than you can in companies that don't. And really starting to talk about, not just the tax folks need to think about how to get the IRA, active for them, or the environment folks need to think about how to, make a good pitch so that they can go invest in something. It's about bringing together the broad strategy within companies to look at, where they are now, and to kind of come together in a holistic, and that's like the whole of company approach to ESG. And once you start doing that and peeling back the silos, you start to see the companies start to understand a little bit more the value proposition for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my experience is a little bit different because, when I first started and where I'm at now, I've always been inside the company. So I've worked for a couple of different types of companies. I worked for a private company, I've worked for a large tech company, and now I'm working for a private nonprofit. I think the challenges within the organizations, the different types of organizations, is consistent, where it's just like if you're going to your executive team and you are trying to pitch something or you are trying to shift some type of culture, without having data to back up what it is you're saying, you're going to run into a challenge. I think where the success, like instances where I've been successful, is really showing the bottom line value and the cost savings and the efficiency. Because at the end of the day, there is a bottom line that every organization is going to have to meet. And a lot of these environmental sustainability initiatives, whether it's looking at decarbonization, looking at waste, looking at water resiliency, all of that can have a financial number savings to it and the efficiencies to it. And so any instance of like not being able to back up what you're saying without the data, I feel like is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so there are plenty of really interesting themes here: authenticity, bottom line, kind of greenwashing. So, like, how do you go about this? So it's not like just fluff, right? I mean, you're changing the organization at the core so that every employee maybe understands these new challenges and wants to work towards it. So how do you go about this? I mean, who do you talk to with your kind of starting point to kind of like make that change happen? And then we'll talk. I mean, my follow-up is going to be on KPIs. What are the metrics to kind of measure this result? But how do you start this process when, as a consultant or, in the marketing or consulting or even, within the organization, who is the most important person to kind of get this going?
That's an easy question for me because it comes from the top. It's the CEO. I come from CPG. I worked at Unilever for many years, leading brand purpose in the prestige portfolio. And yes, they are my client now. I work with a lot of their brands. I also work with Kroger. These are really big companies that when you're thinking about them, I call them a cruise ship. They have so many employees that when you move and you make a difference in their supply chain and their distribution and their consumers, you actually have a very big ripple effect, but it doesn't happen quickly. So you have to start at the top. If there's not buy-in from the top, then you're pretty much already starting at a zero. And then you're looking at how does this work across the company. So often I will work, directly with the foundation or the ESG team. But often I'll work even with the marketing team. We'll pull in the HR team. We'll bring in supply chain. We'll actually look at how we're building an ecosystem around this work, almost like a mini board of directors from the departments that need to be involved, which in my opinion is all of them, because this really is the core of a business. And to your point, what's going to make it survive in the future. So if it's not coming from the top, then that's where the conversation should start.
Okay, and to add to that, so that's you going to the organization and looking at it, as a unit. But can you do that alone? And that I'm going to ask the team about. Can you do that alone, or do you need other partners than just you as a consultant?
So our advisory team works with many partners, and it depends on what the problem is we're solving. Some of these big organizations are doing the work, and they're just having a hard time on prioritizing and communicating it out. And other times when it's maybe a smaller business and they're just starting, it's actually infusing it in and really thinking all of the pieces and bringing it together for business growth on the front end. But doing it alone, I feel like, it's interesting because originally they wanted, this panel had corporate social responsibility in its title. And I was like, well, then I don't think I'm a fit, because corporate social responsibility is something that happens in a silo. What we're really looking at is the future of business. And that's why we're here. So I think if it's one person in an organization, then that organization is not valuing it at the level it should be.
Yeah, so kind of having the right person, and then if the company is too small, maybe kind of looking at other partners. So we'll come back to that, Tim.
Yeah, I think that when we look at sustainability, every company, and nonprofit, and and even government institution, they're on a journey, right? And they could be at the beginning of the journey, and they could be at the end of the journey. And really, the journey never really ends because of the way that the change in regulations, the change in technological capabilities, the change in business models. It really is always continuing to grow and evolve. And so kind of depending on, where a company is in that journey, sometimes it's, we need to just talk about, how to get started, and let's figure out how to measure your impact. And you can see, companies that don't have boards that are aligned with ESG or that haven't been focused on it, to go in and I agree, you need buy-in to have organizational change from the very top. But just getting started, can be, a matter of illuminating what, GHG emissions are, what the waste is in energy, what the risks are, and starting to kind of create some sunlight on, risks that are emerging, creating an understanding of how the new SEC rules that are going to be coming out are going to affect, a company. And as you start to, peel back the layers of the onion, you can see, the opportunities start to arise, but also, the challenges. And that's when you really do need for large-scale change. But the CEO and the board, when you look at how, for large companies, they're going to both commit to and be able to deliver on those promises, because we see a lot of companies that have committed to a lot but don't have the plans in place to be able to actually deliver on those promises. And there is a strong correlation between those that have really rigorous governance principles and those that are actually developing plans that can help them achieve those goals that we know exists. And so for me, where do you access the company? It's kind of where the companies are. You have to meet them where they are and figure out do they actually have a strong understanding of what it's going to take. And if they don't, it's basic education to start out.
Okay, I have to jump in on that because he made such a good point. And definitely, as you guys are all thinking about your next chapters, most of those ideas sometimes come from the most innovative person in the organization, which might be a young, fresh eyes on it. So I 100% agree with you, because these programs can start in little sectors, but if you don't have buy-in from the top, so if you are struggling because your department doesn't understand what you're doing, you can be working on the side and just really know that what you're navigating is like a huge behemoth, which I would be happy to talk to you about later. But thank you for making that point, because I didn't want it to sound like I didn't.
But I think the other point that the team is making, and building on that, is the importance of measuring, right? Mm-hmm. If you're starting to understand what's going on, is to, kind of the data is going to start to see where you are at. And so some companies might not know exactly where they are because they've never measured their, CO2 emissions so kind of starting with measuring and then understanding, okay, yes, I'm far, or, I'm actually not that bad, compared to others, is kind of the first, an important step. And I thought that was kind of interesting too. So the people, but also the numbers are going to be important as an education towards kind of change. So how does that resonate for you in terms of LA 20? I mean, you have to to kind of, places maybe like UCLA might have to kind of think differently about how they are gonna, bring all these people here and in a sustainable way.
Yeah, so I think, Natalie and Tim have kind of hit both points, but what I would like to kind of expand on is once you get that buy-in up from the top, then what do you do, right? So what we've done at LA 28, so I've been with the organization for 2 years. One of the first things we did is a measurement of what we think our carbon footprint is going to be for the games, starting from the formation of our organizing committee throughout the duration of the games. And we did this 7 years in advance, so obviously there's a lot of assumptions in it, but what it did provide for us is this, hot spots of where the opportunities are going to be for us to have reductions throughout the operations of the games. And so having this data, we were able to go and present this to our executive team to show them what it is we need to start focusing on. But after we've done that, it's, we are still a very small organization, and we're going to have a very interesting maturity growth. So right now, we're still under 200 full-time employees. At one point, we'll go to 5,000 employees, and then we'll shut our doors after the games is over. So we're still in that early stages, but I'm not going to be able to do anything without the support of all of our different departments. And so one of the things that we're focused on right now is not only just taking this information to our executive team, but doing the groundwork education with every single department, having representatives from each department sit on a sustainability steering co, and really educating them how their day-to-day decision making, whether it's sourcing and procurement, whether it's marketing, whether it's events that we're gonna be at in LA, like how this will impact what it is we're trying to accomplish, because they need to be on board. And we're fortunate enough that we're an organization that really believes in our mission and value. But outside of that, LA 28, yes, we have very ambitious commitments, but we can't do it by ourselves. And so we'll have to lean into all of our different partners, whether they're our commercial partners, our venue partners, our community partners, and we've started that work and we've started that engagement to understand, Los Angeles is already doing so many great things. How do we tap into that, and how do we build in on that, and where are the gaps and what are the obstacles, so we can understand that as we're building the strategy right now.
Right, so that's building on the partnership question, right? I mean, you are an organization that's kind of working with different, partners. How do you kind of build this relationship? And I know you've really been working with Deloitte, so maybe you can talk a little bit of how, what does it look like, and how you do engage, kind of external actors to help change things inside. I mean, often I know, you bring your consultants when you want to kind of get maybe your CEO or someone to listen, and that helps to have this external voice, this credibility. So how do you kind of work with partners to just bring this change within organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we see our consultants and all of our, partners as an extension of our team. And so, I mean, we could probably talk about some of the work that we're just starting, but taking, mention that carbon footprint assessment, this will be an iterative process for us. We're going to continuously have to update our assessment as we get better data, and Deloitte is helping us on that journey. And one of the things we're looking at right now is looking at what the hotspots of the carbon emission reductions will be for us and what it means for that strategy. So if we are taking a look at the footprint and we're seeing a really big opportunity for reductions for us will be in our supply chain, that's great for us to know, but then how do we do that?
Right.
And so being able to lean in on the expertise of our partners like Deloitte will really put that action plan in place for us to then be able to execute on it. And I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, well, as a professional services partner for LA 28, we could see the impact that the marquee sort of event that is the Olympics can have on sort of illuminating the importance of really delivering on sustainability, but also really actually creating an opportunity for Los Angeles to have some positive results, lasting results from the Olympic Games. And you could see sort of the benefit of engaging with sport and global sport and sort of how it can energize people. But really, when you look at what needs to be done to both construct and deliver the games, but to really look at the landscape of companies that want to be a part of the conversation, you can have a much bigger impact than just what a 1 month period can deliver. You can inspire and create actions that sort of extend well beyond that, and that's why we're all in on really helping to deliver that. And so one of the things that we do when we look at of course, engaging with a partner is what is the sum of our experiences that we can take to the table to go help to deliver. And to your point about partnerships, there are places across the globe that are looking at very similar challenges. We're working with a food and beverage company right now that says, look, we use a lot of packaging material. How do I not have to go out and compete with all the other food and beverage companies that want packaging material? So I'm going to go pull, the most sustainable packaging material, and I'll beat somebody to it. I'm going to have to pay a premium for it, but I'm going to be the one that gets it. How do you look at developing pre-competitive opportunities to get companies to work together to grow and change markets through, really becoming attuned to what are their scope 3 emissions, what are their sort of supply chain emissions, and how can working together, solve that problem, for an industry. And I think that when you look at it, through that landscape, it's not a, this company, that company, engaging here, engaging there. It's about sort of changing the landscape, which is, with Deloitte being one of the largest professional services companies in the world with over 300,000 employees, you're working on a lot with tens of thousands of sustainability type of engagements that we can kind of pull from and help to deliver and create insights, from one industry to another.
Can I add on to that piece? With just an example. So I firmly agree on that concept, and I do a lot of coalition building. So last year, or gosh, no, that's not last year. COVID kind of makes you forget timing. So like 3 years ago, we built the Healthy Living Coalition, which was a coalition of over 30 brands who would be competitive in the marketplace. Big companies like B of A, JP Morgan Chase, small food companies coming together. The founding company I was working with was WW, which is Weight Watchers. And we were really looking at how do we build an ecosystem that can actually fight food insecurity during these few years when it just kind of was going up and up and up. And really from the lens of nutrition insecurity, access to fresh fruits and vegetables, food deserts, things like that. So to your point, what I was trying to do was to take people who are competitive in the marketplace, but think about solutions that serve all of their businesses. Then we can go in together and we can have best practice conversations. We can have learning think tank conversations. We have many nonprofits that are a part of the coalition that are guiding our work, that are there to say this is what's happening on the ground. And then when you build something like that, you can actually take the best of a public-private partnership, which is, the marketing and resources and reach and expertise inside of these companies with the on-the-ground expertise of what people need, bringing lived experience and ideas to the table, things that we're overlooking, assumptions that might be being made. And then you can partner with these bigger entities. So I wanted to tack onto that because that is so, so important. And companies are willing to do that if you are starting from a place of shared industry, moving things forward. It's happening in the fashion industry with textile. It's happening in the food and beverage industry with thinking about new types of proteins. It's happening in, I could keep going, in CPG as we're thinking about gender. So climate, all of that.
Right, so that's important. So it's kind of partnerships to scale up, right? So how do you scale up your change? And then you're getting partners not only to kind of help you make the case within your organization, but also kind of to influence them. So that's really important. It's true that it's often hard to do it alone. It's kind of, these are societal questions we're talking about, issues, challenges, and you can't do it, just alone. So I have two questions. I have one that, has been a little bit kind of bothering me about. So you see a lot of these companies kind of having this portfolio approach. So let's say, I'm going to invest in this new kind of ventures that are, about clean tech, but at the same time, I'm going to continue my, very successful business in oil and gas. And, how do you reconcile that? We're talking about authenticity. How do you I guess it makes sense. We're talking bottom line. You have a business that's working well today. But, what about the long term? And how do you make that change when things look like in the next 5 years they're going to be okay? But, we need to think about the long term. So what is your thinking?
Why don't you jump in first?
Yeah, I think you could probably look at the auto industry as one of the marquee examples. You have some companies that have, that are new entrants that are, embracing, from, day one, the movement to zero emission vehicles, and then others that are some of the that are entrenched industries that are making big bets, and sort of getting opportunities, to be aligned with new investments, and then other companies that are still looking at this as, is the changing consumer preference really gonna take hold, right? And so you have this spectrum, and looking at it from obviously a long-term view. What are the trends in the changing market, as well as a short term, is one way. But I think that it is hard, to challenge the status quo, especially if you've been doing something for 50 years and you've seen trends come and go, or you've even 20 years ago made a big bet on investing in natural gas vehicles, and today seeing those investments really haven't panned out, and so you are stuck with the history of losses, and using that as a reason not to engage in future investments. And so for us, it's kind of it's our job, of course, to sort of talk about, give real talk, hey, you're talking about X, you really need to be understanding about how, why, but also, making sure that when, our partners and the folks that we're speaking to, do come and say, hey, I'd like a business plan for engaging on X, we do have to deliver that, right? Sort of, it's like, you got to be able to speak to what your clients are asking. But if we are being asked for one thing, it would be malfeasance. It would be not proper to talk about sort of the broad risks of in that particular landscape. And I'll just give one example. And I'm talking to a company right now that's asked us, how can I use renewable natural gas to sort of change the dynamics of my GHG emissions in my boilers that I use? And renewable natural gases, it does sort of change the greenhouse gas emissions. And they said, we'd like to get a plan for how we can go out in the market and go buy RNG. Like, who can we buy it from? Where are they located? Is it a 10-year commitment? Is it a 15-year offtake? Should I buy it from one company? Should I buy it from a portfolio? And what we're, of course, seeing is, when you look at the way greenhouse gas accounting is going, like, that's not really going to help them in terms of delivering on the goals of their scope 1 emissions, their direct emissions, because the landscape for how you credit these things is not really in that vein. You can sort of look at your supply chain emissions, but you can't really go in that direction. And so our job was to sit down with them and say, we understand you came to us and said, you want to go, make this investment. And what we're saying is, you may want to rethink that investment and think about other things, efficiency, think about electrification, think about changing your processes to require less. And so I think it's a both and. You need to meet people where they're at, but also illuminate them to the changing landscape and the opportunities that exist, especially in this changing climate, for them to pursue other directions.
Yeah, so long term is an issue, clearly, looking at the long term. And when that CEOs are evaluated on a quarterly basis, they need to think about the long term. And so I was thinking about kind of LA 2028. So you have an event that's very short term. How many months? Like a month?
It's over 4 weeks.
4 weeks. And then kind of what is the legacy of the long term? So talking about legacy. And so then, Natalie, you can build on that. But so how do you do this?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting to use the term legacy. And the way that we're looking at it is, yes, we want to have a legacy, but more than wanting to have a legacy, we want to have an impact. And that impact is something that we can start today. So how we define impact is everything that we're able to do from today to the games that then allows us to have that legacy. So we don't have to start on that work in 2028. We actually need to start on that work right now. And we have set together, we spent this year really looking at our strategy and our impact pillars. And we have 3 impact pillars that we're focusing on right now. One of them, for all 3 of them, it's really looking at accelerating access. So how are we accelerating access to what we're calling a healthy environment? How are we accelerating access to economic empowerment? And then one that's very unique to us because of, we are in sports is how are we accelerating access to youth sports? And we're doing this because any type of solution that we're creating, we're being very mindful that we don't want to just create something for the purposes of the games. We really want to create something that is going to benefit our communities, especially communities that have historically been not a part of this process, and then ensuring that we can showcase this all during the games. But then after we close our doors, these things have to be self-sufficient and running. And so, again, that all comes down to partnerships. And so I know you asked the question of, there's organizations that, there's competing values. I think the way that we see it, especially looking at the regional market, if there is a way that we can create demand, and if there is a way that we can create the business value of investing more in an electrification, in things like this, like not having single-use plastic, that to us is a really big win. To start implementing that now, so then when the games comes, all those things are in place, and then that we're showcasing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that sounds Fast, yeah. So it's actually a longer term, kind of process than just the games. Natalie, thinking about legacy long term.
Yes, that's my favorite thing. But I want to just go back to the question from before really quickly, because I think if someone's comparing where we're going today with what's happened 50 years ago, then they're really missing the mark, because technology has advanced us so fast that the world that we're in is accelerating at a very rapid rate. So it's not based on trends that didn't land in, between 1950 and 1980. We're actually talking about a landscape that now has ChatGPT in it. I mean, we are in a new paradigm. So thinking about the future is so important. And this is the difference between my example of the cruise ship. I think of entrepreneurs as the speedboat. And that's why you have a good M&A team and you have an investment team that's actually willing to invest in some of the risky things that could actually drive your business later, and just kind of keep a portfolio of ongoing ideas that could scale. So that I wanted to go back to, because I think that that's a really important point. On legacy is my favorite. I truly believe that legacy is not something after you die with your name on a building somewhere, which we are surrounded with these beautiful buildings in UCLA. And actually many of the people's names are still here with us. And that's my point. Like, how are we showing up every day, both in, you guys as students in class, with our lives, with our families, with our jobs, with our businesses, thinking about purpose as something that is a part of every day. Again, it's the same conversation that I'm having with brands, where it can't be tacked on to one department on the side. This is the heartbeat of what's driving business. This is the heartbeat of how we should be making decisions. And as consumers and students, we can be looking at these brands, and voting with your dollar is a real thing. And that's why I actually don't see this as a trend at all. I see this as the next wave and generation of actually how we're living and communicating and making choices every day. So legacy is something that I really hope you guys think about infusing now.
So, thinking about kind of people showing up and doing the right thing every day, what do you think of the role of human resources? Because I mean, we've seen kind of some companies just tidying up performance to kind of some sustainability impact, for example. I think that HR have a big role to play these days. So we say, go to the top, but what about HR? I mean, are you working with HR departments? What do you do?
I actually wrote a piece on Labor Day last year called Human-Centered Resources, because I think there needs to be a shift from how it operates to date, I'd say, in most organizations, is sort of protecting the company from employee situations. Whereas I really think we actually need to move, and a lot of at-home work has made that possible, because if you're looking at shorter work times, less time in the office, how are we actually creating a tribe? How are we really making sure that our employees are a part of this? And as I said, when you have a very big company, could be as many people that is in a city, right? So you are really taking care of a huge amount of people's livelihoods. And I think that human resources now is looking at wellness, is looking at, work retention. We have a lot of people who are dropping out of the workforce because they're fed up with being treated in certain ways. So I want to rename it Human-Centered Resources.
No, that's interesting. You're right. I mean, things have changed with, people working from homes. And I got some chief sustainability officers saying, well, it's harder than it's ever been, because we can't really get people to be as connected. And so now it's much more transactional. So people, kind of work for a paycheck, and they are not as feeling included or, kind of responsible or committed to the organization. So it becomes even more difficult to do than before. I think we are in a different paradigms. What do you think?
I was just going to add one thing, kind of combining, the previous question and this question right now. I think that especially with this new wave of generation, what we're seeing is that people want to go work for purpose-driven organizations. And that's why when we're talking about legacy, it's really important to start, have that be the center in some shape or form of what your proposition value is. For LA 28, from the beginning, from our bid phase, there were two things that really stood out for our organization and the type of games that we're creating. So one is that we're the first games that will not be building any new permanent infrastructure for the purposes of the games. And that's because we are building a game that is centered around fitting Los Angeles and not changing Los Angeles to fit the games. And that in itself has attracted so many of our employees to want to work at LA 28. Second, we have to be fiscally responsible. So we are a private non-profit. We are raising all of our own funds for the purposes of the games. We're not taking any taxpayer dollars. So this is intrinsic into the type of organization we are from the beginning, which really helps attract the type of employees that are going to want to be with us between now and 2028.
Right, so kind of that's a benefit of being a purpose-driven organization, that you attract people who are more likely to be committed and do these things. So definitely that's a benefit. I wanted to go back to the authenticity question and the data question. How do you evaluate success? What type of metrics do you guys use in kind of when you're working on organizational change? How to make that substantive, and because we've seen a lot of net zero, as you mentioned, Tim, a lot of net zero commitments that are not super substantive. It's like, in 2050 we'll do this, and then nothing is behind. So how do you assess success, and what type of KPI do you guys use in your in your work?
Yeah, I think that if you look at the sort of success in the legacy side, that can be challenging. Of course, you look at an organization like LA 28, and you measure it in a decade or less, as opposed to some which are looking at their impact over many more years. And I think that's kind of the stuff that Sunny was talking about is sort of these commitments around using the existing infrastructure, the commitments around having appreciable impact on youth sports, engaging local communities, and the metrics that can kind of go into that to track the success is exactly why people want to work there, and why a lot of companies look at this as a real opportunity for them to partner with to help build off that success. Why we're so excited about what LA can do to deliver those games. When we talk to companies sort of more broadly across the landscape, you can look at things like what's embedded in the SASB regs, or the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, or what's coming out of the SEC rules. And those are, of course, important, right? It's sort of like measuring your success, measuring what your material risks are, how you look at your water consumption, your GHG emissions, other sort of components. Of course, these are much broader. Sustainability and ESG is much broader than just environment, right? Looking at, what are your hiring practices like? What's your gender equity, looking like? How do people get paid, and sort of how the metrics sort of pan out? And so you need to look at, much more broad metrics than just, like how much water am I using? That's very important, and because that's also going to help you create a plan for like how do I minimize and how do I direct investments in that. But for us, KPIs are both sort of outward facing as well as inward facing, for this, in order to really create a holistic understanding of where you are and where you want to be. And when you start to invest in the development of those, precision both can be an enemy, like I need to get like this really fine granular detail about I got to hit this metric, but we all know that getting to a 50% reduction in emissions, it's not like a magic number of like, if we don't hit 50, like is the world going to burn? If we get to 51, is the world saved? Not really, right? But they give us targets to sort of directionally go for. And so we tend to, and we think about, at least when you're looking at science, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, what goes into that, looking at accepted institutions and saying, you need to align your metrics to these other bodies. Those are tremendously important. So we do, of course, encourage and promote the use and adoption of the SBTI targets, for at least sustainability related to climate.
One thing to add though, and I agree with everything you said, but I think what's also important, and I've learned this throughout my career, is that when we're looking at KPIs and we're setting targets, there are human impacts. A lot of organizations are so focused on, I have to hit net zero by this day, and that's important, but every decision we make can have an impact on communities and like human beings. And so not losing that component of like why we're doing what we're doing is really important. And I think sometimes like it's, with environmental sustainability, developing those KPIs is a lot easier because there is that standardization and there is GRI and there are things that you can refer to. On the social side, it's a little bit more tricky. And we have, the UN SDGs that are great, but like a really big challenge with the UN SDGs is like there's not standardization of how people are reporting towards it. And it's not apples to apples. And so I think it's important to have KPIs. It's important to focus on KPIs, but it's also important to just like put your head down and do the good work and do the work for the community and bring that community component into like what it is we're trying to accomplish.
That's why you guys are probably investing a lot in bringing communities in to talk to them about what kind of impacts they'd like to see in their communities.
Yep. Right. I mean, the numbers and the KPIs are important. Behind that, you need to have governance. You need to have, people in charge, responsible, and all of that. So that's kind of the inside the house that you don't see. But I think these KPIs can be quite useful to compare companies and kind of provide the kind of a bit of push and competition in there, right? So I just want to kind of, shameless promotion here, saying that at the Center for Impact, we are launching Sustainability Index. We've collected data on sustainability disclosure for S&P 500. And we're hoping that this is helping some of these organizations compare themselves because it's hard to get this data. Otherwise, it's been a lot of work from our students to put it together.
That's great. I was just going to add that it's a really hard time for businesses in this space. And I know that might make you want to roll your eyes, but it's true because a lot of businesses kind of jumped in. And then we had things that I know is affecting your work very greatly, like the ESG setbacks and what's happening on the Hill. So it's a tough time. I've been leading conversations with people who lead this work inside of very big organizations like Google, like Kroger, around what's the difference between greenwashing and green wishing, and really looking at some of these companies that are putting stakes in the ground that are saying by 2050 we will accomplish these things, and they have KPIs set in place, but that is so far into the future. There are so many stakeholders behind the scenes that are attacking, that are not coming to the table to help. There's so many challenges in, things that don't work out. Technology is changing, to your point. So I feel like it's a very fine line between setting an ambitious goal and the people who are actually doing this work in companies not having the support they need to actually reach those goals, and the public would love to, maybe have too soon of backlash when it takes time, it takes innovation, and it takes, varying KPIs and metrics and watching that. So both of your points, I think are incredibly important in that. And then we can think from the macro, true innovation, and if we're looking at something that far into the future, it's going to evolve.
Well, this is a really important point about this backlash, and we could have an entire session on that.
Yes.
So just one last, before we open for questions, if you had, we have lots of students here, if you had some advice to them on, kind of what would be the things that they need to work on to be, kind of transformative leaders, what are the things that will make, give them, put them ahead of the curve? From your own experience, what is important to be, kind of successful at making change happen?
I think this is, maybe a little eye-rolling too, but I think it's really important to love what you do. And I think it's really important to believe in what you're doing, because even in sustainability, like I've only been working in this space for 10 years. And, in the grand scheme of things of how many years I'm probably going to be working, it's not that long. But there are days where it's really hard to get up and want to do this work because, you read the news, you see what's going on, you have the data, you have the numbers. And so like what makes me excited and what keeps me going and what keeps me wanting to work with other people is like, I truly love what I do and I truly love this space. If I didn't, I probably wouldn't have lasted and I probably would be doing something else. But that's the advice I have. And also like, what you're doing will evolve with time. So you're going to graduate, you're going to get a job, that what you do when you first get a job into like that, it'll evolve in so many different ways. And so just be adaptable, be flexible, and that's probably, my biggest advice.
Thank you. Tim and then Nancy.
Yeah, reflecting on my first job out of grad school, I went to Duke and got the Master's of Environmental Management. And I moved back home to San Francisco, and I was looking for a job, and I found a job at a consulting firm that helped oil and gas companies figure out how to avoid environmental impacts when they were siting natural gas pipelines. And so we were doing biological, opinions, stuff that needs to happen, in order to prevent, endangered species from being impacted. And I got about 5 months in, and it was really interesting, talking about endangered species and going out and looking at pipelines. But I sort of realized that I was making the problem a little bit less worse, right? A little bit less bad. And I wanted to kind of I wanted to create solutions, right? And so, as opposed to, mitigating, the harm. And so, when I kind of came to that realization, you start to just get inquisitive about what can I do in that space. And so, fast forward 15 years later, and I was making a transition over to Deloitte, and I was trying to understand, what can I do to position myself, to be as successful in the market as possible, right? And so I started, going through all the, just doing it on my own, internal certifications for getting the SASB, certification for, the fundamentals of accounting. Getting my lead green associate, understanding okay, if we're getting building certifications going and trying to understand what the lead system's like, let's just dig in and me personally dig in and figure out what does that look like, and how can that fit into, my portfolio of tools that I have. And so never sort of giving up, but also position yourself for success, right? If you want to go work in companies, where you're looking at renewable energy, go learn about all the tools that are out there to go develop virtual power purchase agreements, develop, new ways for, accounting, try to dig in and understand and become, an expert in that area that you love. We can all, when we finish school, we are sort of generalists, but become a specialist in something, so that you have that as a part of your toolbox that you can go deliver.
Thank you.
Okay, this is really good advice. Yeah, I have 3, and I'll keep them really short, hopefully. So first one is that you have to do the work on yourself. Back to what I was saying about legacy, it is very important to create a purpose-driven life, to take analysis that you would essentially for a company for yourself. Who are you? What are your values? What are values that maybe you inherited that you don't totally agree with? Create this ethical line of where you start and stop, and know who you are. We live in a world that has a lot of anger right now. And on that note, number 2 is to listen. It goes right into that. Cancel culture and yelling and telling people that they are part of the problem and not having a conversation is not getting us anywhere. We really need to come to the table to learn and listen, and to be able to, I would say, lead more with our hearts, rather than just standing really firm in our grounds. And I know that's hard because it's a really scary place out there, especially when we're reading these things that are happening every day online. But I encourage you, that's where I'm hopeful about the future. And then the third thing goes right into what they were saying, and it's get a job inside of an organization and work really hard and keep going. And as you find out where that line is for you on your purpose, what feels good and doesn't, it might be working for a big organization when you look at where they're invested and you know that paycheck is affecting something in that way. Or it could be that working for that really big company and working on their foundation and having a very big budget to help a lot of people is part of, that these are the conversations that you'll have to have with yourself every step of the way. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's a really kind of a personal ethics answer. So those would be my 3 pieces of advice.
Well, thank you. Excellent advice. I would add, also take the social impact specialization. Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to open up now for questions from the audience. Anyone wants to ask something to this amazing panel? Yes, go ahead.
I think this question will be geared more towards Natalie and Tim. I think we briefly mentioned measuring success and impact, and I know ESG rankings are one of the things that people look at. But it seems that there's just a wide range of ratings that you could look at. They also rate things differently, right? For example, one provider might say, okay, E, S, and G, are equally weighted. Some might say E is 50% of the rating or so. And so with the clients, with the companies that you work with, how do they think about which ranking or rating they want to take a look at? Or does it even matter? Maybe it doesn't.
So probably it's not surprising that part of the practice and what we offer is helping companies evaluate why they got the rankings they got and how to improve them, right? And so geared directly towards whether it's Sustainalytics or MSCI or whatever it may be. People care because it's sort of it's out there in the world for them to see. But then I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to a ratings firm that looks at offsets. And they rank and rate offset developers and projects based on their likelihood of reversal, whether they're going to sort of go belly up, right? And so when I was talking to them about you think about the accounting side of offsets, but let's say you're trying to certify a dairy that just expanded in a local community, and where the community is really impoverished, and they feel that adding to this mega dairy operation is making their community worse, and they're out there talking to their local elected officials, and they're picketing or they're writing letters to say we don't want this facility in our backyard. Well, there's no way for that company, that ratings company, to take that data and ingest it. And so you could have a company investing in carbon credits, to pull from that facility, and they're totally ignoring the fact that there is a social justice component to their investment. And so I think what we're trying to do is broaden the aperture of how people look at metrics, specifically look behind them and look at things that are not traditionally incorporated into them. So yes, you're improving your score, but you're also improving your impact in the world.
Mm-hmm. And the court of human opinion, right? How do people in the world feel about what you're doing? It can never be undervalued. If any of you watched what happened to Anheuser-Busch the past few days. So, all of that work can be your stock plummet or rise based on, how everyone is feeling about you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's less tangible.
Yes.
It could be as effective. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. My question, I think, is for Natalie. Thanks for your comment around human-centered resources. I work for a charitable giving platform that provides a platform for employees to donate to nonprofits. And I agree that there has to be buy-in at the CEO level for whatever the programs are or the coalitions, et cetera. But I think what we talk a lot about is decentralizing and democratizing philanthropy to give employees sort of that agency. And I'm curious to know, how you see that sort of tension between maybe a CSR team or the folks who are kind of driving that strategy, but also how do you engage employees and bring them into that feeling of purpose and empower them?
That is such a great question, and have done that directly. So at Unilever, what's wonderful about working with them is that purpose is very much at the core of their business. They're actually, the CEO made a statement about 2 years ago that they were going to start getting rid of brands in the portfolio, no matter how long they've been around, if they weren't committed to purpose. So working with them is great. And a lot of inside of the brands, I would actually do this work where we would engage the employees around our giving and create opportunities for them to, whether they're weighing in, being able to do internal learning opportunities, connecting them with schools that we've given to, and helping them to have communication with students directly in different parts of the world. I think that that's a huge part of it, because you can't be doing it just outside, and that's mainly in the S out of the ESG. That's the easiest that it falls into. But so people hire me to help them commute internally this work. It's not just externally, and you made this point earlier. We have to look at our business and the people who work for us as our number one customer, right? This is who's driving everything and all the decisions being made inside, and productivity and happiness. So involving them in the process and communicating what you're doing as a company is essential.
One more question? Yes, no? Yes, one more question. And then, okay.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, I think that the introspection and working hard and becoming an expert, all of that is a great foundation. But would you agree that a lot of it has to do with who you know and getting referrals in any industry, whether it's this or law or medicine or life sciences, staying in contact with alumni from the school and professional contacts, so that over time, most people change jobs a few times over a lifetime, and so it helps to maintain and nurture those kinds of connections.
I'm going to answer that one because every single job that I've ever gotten has been through my network. Anytime I have, submitted an application, it's gone into this white space of who knows where it goes. But in grad school, what I focused on was being part of, my Net Impact chapter. I went to all the different conferences I could get my hands on, just volunteering, just so I could put myself in a position to meet people. And then from there, my first job was consulting, and it's because I met the CEO of that consulting firm at that conference. From there, I was consulting, doing at the time it was CSR reports. And then I was able to transition in-house for one of my clients, which was AEG at the time. At AEG, that was when LA 28 was LA 24 because we were putting out a bid for the 24 games. I had met the team from the bid committee because they wanted to, and we are using a bunch of the AEG venues. So when it was time to apply for my job here at LA 28, I had those connections already. So yes, that is 100% important. It's about putting yourself in the right position to then be lucky.
Yeah, I mean, definitely networking is very important. That's why we're here also today, to meet new people and connect. And that's, you never know where it can lead to, but it's important. One last and the real last question from...
Hi, so I work in people at a renewable energy company. I see myself as an employee advocate and not the policy police. But I partner with our sustainability team on, establishing some of our people-related ESG goals. And, so we have company-level ESG goals. And I think something that we're struggling with is helping individuals understand their individual contribution and that their direct work is tied to ESG. So any thoughts on how we help, everyone from like accountants to people on the HR team to engineers feeling like they're directly contributing to our overall 100%. ESG goals?
Yes, I have a very easy answer for that. And just to add on to your question, I would say that I don't think of it necessarily as networking. And I think it's very obvious when someone's walking through a room, handing out business cards, trying to just like make a connection. I really focus on relationship building and long-term relationships. So there's people in my network that we've now been going through our careers together. We've known each other for 15, 20 years. And so I pick up a call from her to ask her what's going on in the field. And so I highly recommend taking the time to go deep with people. Life is a long journey. So on that note, the real easy thing is I used to work at Dermalogica and ran the foundation there. And what we would do is we'd have KPIs. Every job had a KPIs that they were held accountable for in their reviews. And we always had a +1, which was every single person had to name how their job directly impacted that purpose work.
That's a good idea, yeah. All of us should have that, thinking about this. Well, I want to thank you very much for this really kind of insightful discussion. And I hope we can continue a network here in the room and continue the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.